Fletcher, and I'm going to be chairing the meeting in the absence of Councillor Sarah Butikofer, who's had a rather nasty skiing accident. So I'm sure we would all wish her. And I'm going to be chairing the meeting in the absence of Councillor Sarah, my doppelganger. I'm sure we'd all wish her a speedy and complete recovery. Please may I remind attendees to turn mobile phones to silent or laptops. And if required, we'll have a short break, 1.5 hours into the proceedings. We're not expecting a fire alarm, but should a fire break out, follow the officers through the marked exits on either side of me. So the first item, apologies.
Apologies from Councillor Butikofer and Councillor Penfold. Chair.
Thanks very much indeed. Any substitutes apart from me?
No subs, Chair.
Okay. Any public questions?
None, Chair.
Items of urgent business?
None raised, Chair.
Declarations of interest. Members are generally asked at this stage to declare any interest that they may have in any of the following items on the agenda. None of those. Okay, next, to approve the minutes of the meeting of the Governance, Risk and Audit Committee held on the 10th of December 2025. Are we in a position to approve those without my going through it page by page, or do you want to go through it page by page? Any adjustments? Okay, can we maybe vote on that? Proposer, thank you. Seconder, thank you. Vote. Okay, so they're passed as a true record. Thank you. Now, the next item, the first substantive item on the agenda, is the external audit. What we're asked to do with this one is to review the external audit of the financial statements for 2024-25. So can I invite the external auditor, David Rigler, to offer some succinct reflections on this one?
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, committee. So yeah, this is our audit results report from
Sorry, David. I think your microphone's off. Just pop your microphone on, don't you?
I'll largely focus on the exec summary, but more than happy to go into the detail if it's helpful to the committee. You have read the report and you'll see that there has been some challenges, but I think I'd just start with the context. On page 23 of the pack, we set out that context. And I know we've discussed that in this committee before around the government's plans to put the whole system of public financial reporting and auditing on a sustainable footing. Other than the backstop dates, still a lot of work in this area for the sector. So no changes to the financial reporting or the audit scope yet. So I think that's important context to have in mind. The other fact is this is the first audit the council has had in 4 years. If you remember, we've gone 3 years where the accounts weren't prepared in time for us to do an audit. This is the first one in 4 years. So although it's not a completely rosy picture in places, I think it's important to note that this is the first step in that rebuilding that the council has had in 24-25. So just skimming through the exec summary on page 24 of the pack, we just document whether there's any changes to the scope of the audit, and that's in changes to the scope that I reported last year in our audit plan. You'll see the only change there is around the materiality levels, and that's normal. When we get draft statements, we update the materiality levels for our audit, and you'll see they haven't changed a great deal anyway. On page 24, we've also got the value for money, and that's also in section 3. So you recall in last year, we reported a significant weakness around the council's processes for preparing a set of financial statements, then facilitating an audit. Although there is definitely positive direction this year, there's not sufficient enough for us to remove that weakness. So that weakness is still on there, and I'll touch on some of the reasons in other areas of the report. Pages 24 and 25 set out the status of the audit. So we start by just noting those areas where we were unable to complete audit procedures because of the lack of provision of supporting evidence in those areas. There's then some areas that at the date of the report we were still working on, so I can give the committee an update on those areas. So firstly, capital grants in advance. We've been unable to finish the testing in that area. The general ledger system change we have completed, and there's no issues to report to the committee. PP valuations again is completed, no issues to report to the committee. Payroll is just about there, and there's no issues to report to the committee. And WGA, that's just a submission, and that's ready to go. IFRS 16, although we've done work around the council's processes for identifying the leases, we've not been able to complete testing on the actual valuation of some of those assets within the IFRS 16 disclosure. So on page 26 and then section 5, it sets out the audit adjustments. You'll see there's a reasonable number of adjustments affecting the primary statements and the disclosures. Pages 27 and 28, we just touch on the areas of focus. So there was the risk areas that I identified in the plan, and note the work that we've completed in each of those areas. I think the other 3 areas I'd just like to draw the committee's attention to, and I think these are important areas because it kind of sets out where the council is in that whole rebuilding process. So the first one is on pages 30 and 31, and that's a new analysis that we've included in our audit results reports for all councils this year. And it's kind of an assessment of the key areas which we believe support a timely provision and accurate provision of working papers, but also facilitate the rebuilding and an audit process. So hopefully members will find that useful. You'll see that there are areas for improvement, and it's probably no surprise when there's areas of the audit we can't complete. But as I said, this is moving from a position where you haven't had an audit in 3 years to the first audit. And we've already started discussions with officers in terms of how we can move forward and improve on those areas. The last 2 bits I'd just like to draw to your attention. So on page 64 of the pack, so this is in the appendices, Appendix A, again a new one this year. That is progress to full assurance, and it's based on the National Audit Office's guidance in terms of what's the quickest route of getting back to a completely clean audit opinion. You'll see the council is behind that timeline at the moment. The focus has to be on us being able to complete all procedures in 1 year, then we can start to rebuild. Obviously, with 3 years of no audit, there's a larger chunk of rebuilding work that will need to be done. The first step is to complete all procedures in 1 year. And then Appendix B on pages 65 to 67. So this sets out where the assurance actually can come from. So this is where you can see actually your assurance is starting to rebuild. We've included obviously the 23-24 where it was all red because there was no audit work done whatsoever. And as you can see in 24-25, there are now areas starting to turn green or amber to demonstrate that level of assurance that is starting to rebuild. But I think there's their acknowledgement there that there is more to do, obviously, there to get back to a fully green picture. So I'll stop there, but more than happy to answer any questions in any more detail.
First of all, thank you to the officers and also the external auditor for such a comprehensive work. I just wanted to ask our AD if he feels confident that we can keep this trajectory of improvement going. Do we have the resources, as in staff resources, to keep that moving forward? Thank you.
So in terms of a plan, I've sort of briefly spoken to the finance team already about this report and the sort of red, amber, green of the assurances here. So the finance team are completely on board with not only just looking to turn the reds and ambers into greens, but also making sure that we also maintain the greens as well. We think that's important too. In terms of resourcing, I think this is a challenge probably all finance teams are facing across the UK. currently. So, but I think we're sort of doing the best we can in that area. I think is probably the best way to put it.
I would also like to recognise the very hard work that's been put in, not just by the external audit team that have pointed out some valuable lessons, which we will learn, but to the finance team who've been conducting supporting audit field work and finalising the budget simultaneously. And it was the first audit for 4 years as well, so there's a lot of people that haven't been through it, but they've started from a good place. Well, not where we want to be, but they're heading in the right direction. And I'd also, whilst we still have some gaps in our resource, we unfortunately lost our technical accountant during the middle of the field work. We're in a much more stable position in terms of leadership, I believe, and I stand to be corrected if I'm wrong, that this is the first time in 5 years that we've had both a permanent Section 151 and deputy Section 151 working at this council.
Mr. Platten, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to echo the comments about the amount of work that's gone into this, like a massive endeavour by the sounds of it. So thank you to everybody involved. Just building on the earlier point that was raised by a colleague, I'm kind of interested in what happens next, who does what, when, to address some of the issues. It sounds like there's a really encouraging trajectory here. But what was going through my mind reading this is, well, so what? So what happens now in terms of an action plan? And I was kind of half hoping there might be one in here to say, here's what we're going to do by when, here's who's going to do it. We're going to baseline the timelines for that action, just so we can maintain that momentum. I just wondering if you want to say anything about that. Thank you.
Yeah. So there are some brief actions. So I suppose that before I get to that, the first point is that the accounts are still yet to be signed. So there's still procedures happening in the background to tie it all down. So until we're kind of at that point of completion, that's when we'll start to look at putting into those concrete plans of what we're trying to achieve by when. But there are the annual governance statement, the very last item on the agenda, has some of the actions linked to findings of this audit report. So the annual governance statement has been updated to reflect that and kind of how we look to achieve that and by which date as well. But in terms of coming up with the finer plan of looking at the individual areas individually, that will happen after the audit, but then the action plan that we have there could also be brought back to GRAC at a later date in terms of how we're looking to implement and what we're looking to change.
Thank you very much. Is the current position what you'd expect, having had no audit for so many years, or were you surprised with any of your findings? Thank you.
I think there's an awful lot of challenges within the system, so I'm not sure I had expectations coming into it. I think what I hoped is that we would see trajectory, and we've seen positive direction. You are not alone in terms of when you're looking, there's reds and ambers and not so many greens. What we're doing as a firm is in March, we're going to publish kind of a system overview, if you like, to consolidate all of the findings we've had from all of our audits, so you can then better see where you are positioned in comparison to others. We're also hoping to include a couple of case studies, so some almost like best case examples. So for those that are green, that are at the top of the pile, what is it they do differently to everyone else to give councils a better direction? So I think it's important to note next year, so the deadline at the moment is the end of February. Next year it's the end of January. The year after that it's the end of November. So within 2 years' time, we're going to have 3 months less to complete all of these procedures. So without fundamental improvements across the system, not just this council, but lots of councils involved in this. My worry is that suddenly the level of assurance will start to dip again because we won't have so much time in order to build that assurance.
And will you be sharing that benchmarking with us? Thank you.
Yeah, it will be issued to the council, and I can't see any reason why it can't be brought to the committee as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the report. Based on what you've said, I'm assuming this will be a disclaimed report.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it was always going to be a disclaimed report because we had no assurance on the opening balances. But yeah, there's different levels. So you've got a disclaimer. What you're aiming for initially is a qualification, which again doesn't sound great, but it's more of a we've done everything apart from these areas. Whereas a disclaimer is more pervasive because you've got more pervasive gaps in the assurance. This year, I would estimate across all of our councils about 20% are maybe moving to qualification. So you kind of get a feel for, actually, you're very much in a pack at the moment.
Thank you for my another follow-up one. Possibly for Officer King or Officer McCallum. If we go to page 48, there's a list of factual misstatements in there. What impact do they have on sort of the current budget process that we are going through at the moment? And are there any in there that actually surprise you?
So I think there's a section within the report as well that, if I briefly find the page, where it sums up the total impact. So on page 52, there's the total corrected misstatements line that shows the impact there. So, the effects of those adjustments will be, so the total impact is there, but in terms of looking at them individually, some of them will be as simple as just moving the number from one line on the balance sheet to another line on the balance sheet, whereas some of them will have impacts on the I&E. So, but those they've recently been posted and they'll be considered as part of that budget. Sort of the impact on those will be considered there. So but the majority of them are as simple as moving a balance that was already in there from one place to another. So it's no sort of net impact on the bottom line of the I&E for most of the adjustments there.
I'm politically restricted. Yes, in answer, building on Officer King's comments there, coming into this council in September, just before the audit started, and obviously not involved in producing the draft accounts. I think there's some areas which were around timing, the delivery of the accounts. It was Dan has done a fantastic job during a period of remarkable upheaval, and hadn't been with the council that long either. So I have deep gratitude for his work over this. Certain things like the pension changes, that was I understand to be a timing issue in that the report wasn't available to us. So we went with previous numbers on a slightly different basis. There are important lessons to learn around cut-off procedures, around the posting of the year-end cash balances, which we have an action plan to implement those for the coming year-end next month. And also around that year-end close procedures around valuations and classification of assets, and again having more internal scrutiny. Hopefully that will be made easier once we've recruited the new technical accountant, and that's gone out to market today. So we're taking steps towards it. I met with David at the audit kickoff meeting back in October, and we'd agreed that it was likely to be a disclaimed audit because of the opening balances position. So in terms of the overall audit opinion, that has not come as a surprise. And I'm very pleased that we're on a positive trajectory.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. That sounds encouraging, but can we sort of have assurance that next year we will actually, our expectation is a qualified audit? And if that is the case, following answers to previous questions, will you be putting sort of a plan together? You talk about an action plan, but it's almost a project plan in terms of these are the milestones we need to hit in order to deliver whatever information is required for the external order, in order for them to have all the information they need to do that.
I think as Chief Executive, I should answer that because I wanted to respond to Mr. Platton's question as well. I agree with everything that's been said, and I'm grateful for Mr. Wriggler's comments that we're on an improvement journey, and Mr. McCallum is right to say that we're in a stronger position in terms of the financial leadership of the authority at an officer level than we have had for 5 years. But we are, in responding to local government reorganisation, entering a period of very significant pressure into the future. So I don't know whether it would be honest of me to sit here this afternoon and give Councillor Cushing the assurance that he wants. That is clearly what I would wish to be able to say to you, Councillor Cushing, that we would be moving towards a qualified position next year, building on the improvement that we have, an unqualified position, moving on the position, continuing the improvement journey that we have seen. But the government's expectation is that we continue to provide services as business as usual during the next 2 years, during which time any new unitary authorities are established. And that will require a significant both officer and member input to the formation of those new authorities. And over the last 12 months, that the engagement in those discussions has largely been the leader of the council and myself. But as we move forward to forming those established new councils over the next 2 years, there will be a wider requirement on officers of the authority in building those new councils. And so the stretch targets that Mr. Wriggler has outlined in terms of the dates coming forward from February to January and then to November over the next 2 years. And although the new councils are expected to become into being on the 1st of April 2028, there will be a legacy requirement for us to resource finance beyond that, because we'll have to close down the accounts of this organisation beyond the 31st of March 2028. So I'm really pleased with the progress that's been made. I would like to think that we will be able to sustain that progress and continue that improvement journey, but it isn't without external challenges which are beyond the control of this authority. It's not totally within the gift of the council, given the change or scale of change that local government reorganisation will impose upon us. And I think it's important to acknowledge that up front.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification, and I totally understand the situation that you face. Just a sort of minor challenge back to suggest that I still think it might be a reasonable aspiration, if not a target, to get there. And I also think it's a reasonable request to be thinking about what is the plan, the action plan to take things forward. I mean, one of the things I grappled with a bit with here was trying to identify which of these things are actually material, which of them actually kind of are things that perhaps we as a committee should be worrying about. And it's quite hard to look through that. Whereas if you have an action plan that says, actually, here's why this one really matters, whether it's, I don't know, valuation or pensions, whatever it is, here's why this matters, and here's what we're going to do about it. That can give the committee some assurance that those things that matter are being taken forward. Whereas some of the others might be, I don't know, accounting nuances or whatever that are important, but maybe aren't quite as significant. So I wouldn't rule out the aspiration, is what I'm saying. I think, but also some planning, I think, could really help in terms of providing the assurance that what's in here is being taken forward, notwithstanding the constraints that the council faces with the reorganisation. Thank you. Yeah, it's the sort of so what. So you have this report. So what is the council going to do, taking it forward, given the constraints that you currently face? What's the action plan? Which of these things do you think really need to be focused on that will have I mean, not everything has an equal importance and weighting. So which are the things that matter most? So I would hope to see some kind of plan of action. I think what I'm saying for what's the council going to do on the back of this to get as close as we can to a qualified accounts next time round. Thank you.
Yep, I suppose I'd just refer to section 6 of our report where we've made some control observations. There is a bit of a risk rating in there. I think it needs more detail underneath that, and I presume that's what the committee would like to see, because the first read is, well, preparing a set of accounts, and there's going to be a lot of aspects to that you'd probably want to see a more detailed action plan, but probably responses to that in the first instance kind of gives you your first step on what officers are then doing in relation to those recommendations.
Yeah, so as was mentioned, those key themes that will form part of the action plan in terms of our response to that. So, but I think we have to finish the remaining audit procedures first before we can have that, because we plan to have a closeout meeting with the manager of the audit. We've discussed having a closeout meeting in terms of sort of other things that might be helpful. So, but I suppose one of the other key points about the audit as well, I think has been touched on briefly, but there is the finance team, a lot of the finance team staff members haven't previously been through an audit. I used to be an auditor, so I know what's involved, but equally I can't respond to 300 requests for information on my own. So there's, so I think it's been a sharp learning experience for what's involved in that process, and they'll be better geared up for that for future audits.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'm just looking at the statement of accounts. It says it reflects the completion of the external audit, but the external audit is dated the 4th of February. So can I be assured that the statement of accounts that we're about to look at next does fully accommodate all your findings from the audit? Is that?
Well, the team are currently working through the changes, so we've just received the revised accounts. We shared the adjustments. There's often a process then of, as you can see, it's not a short statement, that statement of accounts, and you change one figure and it changes 2 or 3 others.
Yeah.
So there's a process of going through just to make sure that we and officers are absolutely sure we've got to the right figure.
So was that yes to an assurance, or that it does fully reflect it? Thank you very much.
Yeah, so in order to get the the accounts prepared ahead of the deadline for GRAC, the adjustments were communicated to the finance team. We then tried to flow through the changes in the statement of accounts, but it's not always as simple as just changing the numbers, because there's journals underneath that have to change. And as was mentioned, you change one number, everything else changes, and so it, you know, one adjustment might actually hit 7 or 8 places depending on what it is. But the accounts that are in this pack reflect the audit, so they have been updated for the audit adjustments as in EY's report. So, but obviously subject to final checks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just following up to earlier comments, are you able to give us a commitment that we will actually see an action plan for the next one with some dates on there? What I'd rather do is throughout the coming year sort of manage our expectations where we are along that path, as whether we were on track for a disclaimed report or a qualified report. And is there anything that can be done about it? And following up on Mr. Patton's excellent point about priorities, for example, on page 66, looking at the areas, well, we have areas like reserves. Well, obviously millions of pounds of the council's assets are tied up in reserves. Now, in terms of priority, one would assume that would be very important. And I don't know how that compares with some of the things like short-term creditors, which may or may not be very important. But you know, are there priorities in there that we really ought to be throwing? If you can't do the whole lot, are there areas where you need to be throwing bodies at in order to make sure at least those ones we have some assurance about?
Yes, so as Officer King mentioned earlier, it's our intention to draft an action plan for the next 12 to 14 months in terms of improvement extending on to the end of this council. But there's the short and medium term objectives. There does definitely seem to be a demand for that action plan to be presented to this committee, and so we can commit to doing that. In terms of will we have a qualified audit report, Officer Blatch has very clearly articulated the challenges facing us. I'll also give one tiny example. So, for example, that would impact next year's audit. So the next audit will be the financial year ending next month. So there are findings in this audit report that will impact next year's audit because it's a recommendation that we change some of our working practices, and we're taking those on board and working out how we can implement those. But we haven't done that for 10 months of the year. So certain aspects of the audit report you could copy and paste into next year's because we're learning about it now. And we didn't have those processes in place on the 1st of April 2025. So in terms of a qualified audit next year, we'll be progressing towards it, but I don't think we can commit to a qualified audit for the reasons that we are starting 10 months too late.
Just one final suggestion. I'm just remembering an excellent presentation from your project management folk, and just wondering if this might be a great space for them to help in terms of helping apply a bit of that discipline to the response to this. I totally get the points around, you know, now's not the perfect timing to set that up, but the commitment to develop an action plan. But I think if there's any capacity at all in that project management team to have a look at that and to advise on how best to do that planning and to drive it forward to make sure that the things that matter in the action plan are actually delivered, that might be something worth thinking about, even just a 10-minute conversation with. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that sounds sensible, and I'll certainly reach out to them. I know obviously with some of the things we have to be mindful of when implementing action plans is all the other requirements of the finance team, the cyclical reporting we do with the budget monitoring, the outturn reporting. So yeah, so I think input from the project managers could only be helpful there.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a remark actually, and I'm really, really pleased to see it in section 6 that there'll be a grants register, a formal grants register. I think that would be incredibly helpful to every department in this council and also to members as well. So congratulations on that. And if it can be brought forward sooner, that would be helpful when you're looking at resources and staffing with that. I think that's absolutely commendable. And yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. So these financial statements are the same set of financial statements that were brought to GRAC in September last year, but have been updated for the audit adjustments and the audit findings. So I suppose the first thing to say, just to sort of preempt a question, is that there's a clerical error on page 145 with a comment from myself, which in printing these as a PDF, because it's so large, it doesn't pop up and show you straight away that the comment's there. So that comment should have been deleted.
Well, it's on page 145. isn't it?
145 of the pack, yeah. So there's a comment there. So, and that's driven by the change from the pension reports we receive from our actuaries. So that was just a query from myself, which was resolved, and the comment should have been deleted before publication. So it's just a clerical error there. But I know with the wider financial statements, the kind of structure of them is the same as the same set of accounts that were taken to GRAC. So in terms of some of the balances or movements, happy to talk you through if I know offhand what they are, but mindful these are over 100 pages long, and lots of numbers make up the numbers on the financial statements. So I may have to give a written response to some queries if you have them. I'll do my best.
Thank you. As you say, thank you for that. And you rightly said, and we've seen it before. Clearly, there was a significant variance in terms of the outturn last year of over 4.7 million. What has been learnt from that, and have you got assurance that this year's outturn will be somewhat closer to what we anticipate seeing?
Yeah, so I think so the budget monitoring we do is obviously trying to forecast that outturn position, and I know that the period 10 budget monitoring is currently being drafted at the moment, and steps are being taken in that budget monitoring to just really try to scrutinise with budget managers in terms of those variances and what they might be, and just trying to get a more accurate position of those.
I was going to make a very similar point. Thank you, Chair. I was actually pretty surprised by the variance, the scale of the variance. I was looking at capital in particular, with a 74% variance for one of the lines. I'm amazed almost by that scale of variance. And what it got me thinking was about forecasting processes that you might have in place. And it's fine at the moment because this is an underspend, but if it was the other way round and there was a variance, I'm interested in the checks and balances and the extent to which this is something that's being addressed, sort of building on Councillor Cushing's point, I think. Thank you. Looking at page 94, I should have said thank you.
So with the capital expenditure, so this is so the things such as the leisure centre in Fakenham and sort of delays on delivering that project where it would have been included in a budget and then has not happened is kind of why the outturn capital expenditure is less. So it will also reflect on capital projects which for whatever reason on an individual basis haven't progressed as planned. So there may have been a budget for a certain amount and expected that all of that work would have happened in 24-25. But when we've got to the end of the year, for whatever reason, whether that's a planning delay or whatever delay might have caused it, hasn't happened. So that's why the outturn is showing a big underspend there, because it's that planned expenditure hasn't happened, but it will be in the capital programme monitoring that comes to the budget monitoring that will show us there still being a budget in there. So the budget still remains for that project, but it's just not been spent in yet.
No, it's helpful. Thank you for that explanation. And I understand that stuff happens, but it kind of suggests to me that the planning perhaps isn't taking account of risks that might crop up in terms of extended deadlines or things not happening. And that what happens mid-year to adjust budgets, if you do that, might need looking at. I mean, I understand that things can happen in capital projects, but this is suggesting to me that something in the profiling isn't quite right, and that you're not necessarily looking at the risks that are likely to crop up in a capital project and planning your budget accordingly. And what that means is you've got budget wrapped up in capital projects that might usefully be deployed somewhere else, presumably. But anyway, thank you.
I can help my colleague there if you like. That used to be something that was underneath my portfolio before I sort of stepped back a little bit. So we actually get grants in as well. So we've allocated a sum of money to do projects, but then sometimes we get given a grant from an unexpected source, which is why I was very pleased to see that we've got a grant measure coming forward that actually takes that project and pays for that project, which is amazing and probably a one-off. So it's nice to see that we've got some money in the kitty for doing other projects. So I hope that helps you.
So I think the 74% variance in respect of the investing in communities did relate to the Fakenham Leisure Centre. This was a offer of grant that was made to the authority through the Levelling Up programme of the previous Conservative government. There was then a delay on the change of government for the incoming government to confirm that we had that funding, which delayed our ability to procure and secure planning permission within the time window that was originally envisaged. So the project is being progressed. They're on site, and a revised delivery date has been pushed back by about 12 months, and we're now looking for completion in Q1 of 2027, whereas I think it was due for completion at about this time in terms of the original submission that we made to the government in 2023.
Don't forget, sorry, Andrew, don't forget your microphone.
Good. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Officer Jordan. Yes, no, we're good. So the recommendation, as far as this document is concerned, is to approve the statements of accounts. The delegated authority is given to the chair, and I would need to suggest an amendment to that. I would like that delegated authority is given to the chair, or in their absence of the deputy chair, in other words me, of the Governance, Risk and Audit Committee, to approve the final statement of accounts in 24/25, enabling statutory sign-off and publication. Okay, so there's a slight amendment to the wording as placed. Can we proceed to a vote on that? All those in favour, could you raise your hands?
Andrew, don't forget proposal in a second.
You're proposing it to the seconder for that.
Oh, glory. I beg your pardon. Sorry. A proposer? A seconder? Okay. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Can we vote on that, please? Okay, looks unanimous.
It's now that that's amended, if you vote on the amended.
Oh, right. Yes, can we vote on the amendment? Do we need to propose and second that?
We voted on the amendment. This is voting on the change.
Right, okay, sorry, I do beg your pardon. We're now voting on the substantive motion rather than on simply the pen that signs it. Okay, again, a proposal and a seconder for that. Proposal, a seconder, thank you very much indeed. Vote. In favour? Good, okay, sorry about that. Right, thank you very much indeed. On to the next, which is the annual governance statement. Would the monitoring officer like to talk to this one? Oh no, okay, Officer King, thank you.
Yeah, so the annual governance statement, again, was this will probably look familiar because it was brought to GRAC in September last year. So it's the annual governance statement that's for the year 24-25. So on reflection of the audit report received, we've updated the annual governance statement in particular on pages 204 and 205 of the pack to reflect the themes in the findings in the audit report. So we've got the sort of the issue and the action / outcome updated in there. So there's other small changes throughout the annual governance statement where at the time of writing or the time of preparation I think it was July time, that the position has changed. So an example of that is I think it initially read the constitution is sort of being updated. That has now since happened. So there's been minor tweaks in the word in there, but the other areas of the annual governance statement are largely the same there. So for example, the section on internal audit hasn't changed because that's a true reflection of 24-25.
Thanks very much indeed. Are there any comments on the annual governance statement? Mr. Platten.
Thank you. Very happy to see an action plan in here, page 203 to 205. So thanks very much for putting that together, whoever did that. Just two observations, and I'm conscious I make these points quite regularly, so apologies for repeating them. But one is when we have a target date, I think it'd be really useful for the committee to know that that's been baselined, and then if it shifts the next time we see it, we can spot that the date is shifting to the right, and if necessary, ask appropriate questions about that and why that's the case. I think it's something I've raised about risk separately. And secondly, my sense, I don't know the detail here, but my sense is that some of these issues matter more than others. So just a sense of priority. So which of them might have the biggest impact on the council's overarching objectives or the risks, corporate risks, for example. I don't really get a sense of that looking at it. So just a couple of thoughts as to how you might add even more value to this document, which I think is great, by the way, sort of prioritizing it and then baselining the target date. Thank you.
Thank you. Officer King, would you like to speak to that or?
Yes, I think we could build in a way of tracking when the target dates are there. But I think in terms of which issues are more important to the council, I think that's probably a subjective question in terms of, for example, the audit is very important, but then if the kind of question was asked around IT strategy, we don't have a good IT strategy, which is another issue there, then that could open up other issues. So I think I don't know if there's a way that we could rank them in terms of importance. That might be tricky to do because I think these are kind of key governance issues that identified. And for background information, in preparing the annual governance statement, all assistant directors are contacted and asked to fill in a questionnaire, and this questionnaire then helps form the basis of what the annual governance statement says in terms of what are the key issues. So that's how things such as service plans will be identified, because through this questionnaire process, it's been identified that maybe all the service plans haven't been updated as they should have been. So that's kind of how that comes about. So
Thank you very much. Do you want to follow up on that?
Just, I think if you have an action plan where nobody has a clear sense of which bits of it matter more than others, which I think I may have misunderstood what your response, but I think that's pretty worrying. I think it's important to understand when we touched on some of this earlier. So for example, the audit recommendations not being implemented. My sense from the conversation earlier is that that's potentially pretty important. I'd expect to see a sort of more detailed plan of action of what we're going to do on that going forward, and some rigorous approach to kind of timelines on that. Some of the others less so. But you know, I guess I'm asking the question. What you do with that is your call. I think for most action plans, you would expect to get a sense of which of these things are the riskiest and might have the biggest impact on the council's business, and actually make sure that your target date aligns with that as best you can. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, so I think for so in terms of update, we can bring this back and have an updated position based on, you know, where with those issues that have been highlighted, what the progress is of them. That's something we can certainly bring back. You know, sitting here today, I know, for example, the second issue there, the council's IT strategy, that is largely done. It's been to CLT for review. There's a few minor amendments that's sort of been suggested, and that's been updated, ready to go back to CLT for their review. So that item there is there or thereabouts of being complete. And so in terms of the other point as well, which is important here, is that a lot of these actions sit with different people as well. So those individuals involved. So the IT strategy sits with myself. So I know that that's in progress. So in terms of order of importance, sometimes if there's officers on that have an action here, so they'll be well aware of that, and it might be their only action that's on this action plan. So in order of priority, obviously as a council prioritising it, but individually of who's responsible for what, it may be that an officer only has one thing on here, and that by definition has to be their priority, I guess. But yeah, certainly we can bring back like an updated position on how we're progressing with those issues.
Thank you. Any further remarks on that? Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Chair. It's very good to see on page 196 that the audit opinions are all assured, and there is no areas that are not assured. How do the audit opinions translate into audit assurance? Because when we look at the audit opinions in GRAC, we sometimes see urgent recommendations that to me imply that you wouldn't necessarily give unqualified assurance, but it may be that they're apples and oranges. I'm comparing apples and oranges. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
So I suppose the first thing I'll say, just so there's no confusion, these on page 196, that's the internal audit opinion. So in terms of the recommendations and how they're categorized, I think discussions on kind of like the impact and how important they are to the audit that's been undertaken is kind of the urgent. But in terms of how that translates into whether it's limited or reasonable or substantial, I think it depends on the overall other findings of the audit as well. So if there's an urgent recommendation that covers one area, but actually everything else is substantial assurance, I don't know how. I'd probably have to refer to the internal auditor for that definition of how that then translates to different opinions. So, but that section of the report hasn't changed since September. So, and obviously that also links to the action plan, third one down, of the audit recommendations not being implemented, and that's where the audit recommendations get brought back to GRAC, I think quarterly for consideration. So that's when those audit recommendations and which ones are urgent and how they're being progressed, that's how they're reported through that way.
to the action plan. Remind me, do we see this outside the scope of this report in future committees? Because it would be useful actually to be able for us to be able to monitor progress against those as we proceed throughout the year.
So I believe currently the issues on some of them do come back and are monitored. So as mentioned, the audit recommendations that comes back as a quarterly item. But for items such as the IT strategy, I don't believe currently there is a mechanism to monitor that. But that's something we can bring back. It's kind of the status of those sort of actions and outcomes there. That's something we can build in.
I suppose my only ease is we pick out that one in particular. We haven't had that an IT strategy for years. The deadline is by the end of March. I'm assuming if nobody's working on it at the moment, you're not going to whip one up in the next 6 weeks, given that sounds like quite a lot of work, unless you've got one that I don't know about. But and it comes back down to where if we haven't had it for years, is it a priority that we haven't had one for years, given that we're actually moving on to something else in a couple of years' time anyway?
Yes, I think as mentioned before, the IT strategy is substantially complete, subject to CLT review. So that item, for example, is there or thereabouts. So that item in particular had gone to CLT. It had been sort of drafted, gone to CLT, had some sort of very minor amendments suggested to it. Those have now been actioned by the officer. Reviewed by myself in the next stage as it goes to CLT for final sort of approval. So the issues and actions on there are being you'll see on page 204 the environmental charter says it's now complete. So they are being implemented but at the moment the kind of mechanism to inform you of that progress I until the next annual governance statement, where it might not be on there anymore, then it's no longer. But other than that, there's no progress reporting, but it's something we can build in.
There isn't, thank you. There isn't a direct report on this action plan. The actions in this, in terms of the internal audit reports which are received during the year, are reported at this committee at every meeting. And there is, in terms of our performance management processes, there is regular and ongoing review about the achievements, because there has been slippage on, we haven't completed all of the audit recommendations in the timescales which managers have signed off. So the internal audit takes place. I've been questioned before on how that audit plan is developed and whether we go for easy wins or whether there has been a fall in performance. We treat internal audit as an improvement tool. So we suggest areas of work where we think our improvements our systems are weak or could be improved. It's on the risk-based approach. So there are things that involve cash collection, potential risk of fraud or under recovery are every other year, I think, but other reports are less frequent. So they're agreed in the annual audit plan. The internal audits are then undertaken by the contractor. The management response is agreed, and then timescales are set. And what we haven't been doing or hasn't been doing as an organisation is having sufficient focus on whether those actions are then implemented. So the annual governance statement is just a single line for each of those audits about whether they're complete. The actual reporting on the individual audit recommendations, high, medium or low priority, are reported through a different process.
Sorry, Andrew, microphone again.
Recommendation, sorry, is that the committee approve the annual governance statement for the year ended the 31st of March 2025, to be signed by the Chief Executive and Leader of the Council. Can we have a proposer for that one? Okay, a seconder? Okay. All those in favour, raise your hand. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, that's Unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Right, can we go on to the Treasury management strategy? And can I again ask Officer King? Right, to speak about that. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, so the Treasury Management Strategy, I believe some of you may have already seen this document. So this is it's a statutory requirement under Local Government Act 2003 that we have to produce this, and we have to comply with the standards that SITFA set out in their Treasury Management Code. So this document covers off all of those sort of requirements. It largely sets out our treasury management strategy for things such as cash flows, how we sort of invest in surplus funds, the limits on those, our borrowing, MRP, CFR, and all the other fun financial things are included, but happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much indeed. Would anybody like to raise any points in respect of that? Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Chair. On page 220, the total CFR in table B is just slightly different to the forecasted CFR in table A. Is that, are we again comparing apples and oranges here? One's total and one's forecasted.
Sorry, which two numbers are you looking at? Apologies.
I'm looking
Just repeat where you are, yes.
table B, line 2, total CFR 26-27 is 25,773. And if you go down to table A, forecasted long-term borrowing based on current capital programme, you've got your forecasted CFR as above, estimated at 22,507. Are they different numbers, as it were?
Yeah, so table A is based on the current capital programme, whereas table B is the CFR projections if all the new capital bids are approved and then join that capital programme. So that's why the two numbers are different.
But they're both estimates.
Yeah, so
They're different estimates.
yeah, so table A is looking at currently what is the estimate of the CFR of all of the capital programme as it is. So the capital programme as approved in the budget last year, that's the estimate of the CFR in there. Whereas table B looks at what if the new capital, if the capital bids are approved by full council next week, what will that capital programme's CFR look like in 26-27? So that's why there's two different numbers.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask another question?
Yes.
Thank you. On page 225, with the Treasury portfolio, it looks as if we're managing the ratio of in and out of house management has changed quite a lot. I wondered if you could just walk me through that. So the total managed in-house was 21 and that's 44%. And externally was 79% and 56% internally. I'd be interested to know why that is. Thank you.
So you'll see where money market funds has moved from the actual position at the 31st of March 25 to 21%. That reflects £5.3 million of investments, whereas currently, as of 30th of November 25, that's 44%, which is because of a result of there being more money market funds. So more investments on there. So in terms of what those investments are, any surplus cash that we have will get invested in money market funds. So this is impacted by things such as if we receive grant money ahead of schedule for works, before we pay contractors to do those works, that money can be invested. So that's exactly what we do. Or it may be collection of council tax might be slightly higher. So we have more cash before we pay the precepts over. And so that's just a kind of impact of that. So there'll be lots of little underlying reasons to why that balance is larger.
So it's an accessibility rather than a risk issue, is it? Would you say?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the money market funds, I think that reflects that this year compared to last year, to the actual position at 31st of March for that year. In this current financial year, we're having the cash flow has been a bit easier to manage compared to last year. I think you'll remember that last year we had a lot of short-term borrowing happening, whereas this year we haven't had any short-term borrowing happen in the year, which is kind of just a reflection of kind of that cash flow, but there's been more cash available, which obviously that cash gets invested in money market funds to maximize sort of interest income.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Cushing.
Yes, actually, that's a point I was going to actually raise. So in real terms, in money that we've got in the bank, so to speak, is the 20 million, which is the bond funds, the equity funds, property funds, and multi-asset funds. They're sort of our long-term savings, are they? And then on the other side of the balance sheet, you've got the £5 million worth of borrowing. And then whatever the difference is in the money market fund. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to, that's fine. May I ask another question?
Yes.
Thank you. If I go through to page 228, and it talks about gilt yields. There's been a lot of speculation in the press looking at the current turbulence in the government and its economic strategy that gilt yields seem to be on the increase. And obviously they had a wobble on Monday when I thought the Prime Minister is going to have to resign. What would be the impact on the council's finances if gilt yields do increase markedly?
So in terms of those figures set out on page 228, that sets out sort of the rates at the time of writing this report of the PWLB borrowing. Obviously, they'll be impacted by globally events that unfold. But in terms of the financial impact on NNDC, we, as a part of the budget, we try and forecast as best we possibly can what those interest rates are. So currently, PWLB is that interest rate when we entered into that £5 million loan is known, and so that doesn't change when we throughout the year. So that's a known amount. Whereas, so that's what's built into the budget is the assumptions that is at the time of the budget is the best of our knowledge. But obviously, when it come round to April, May time, when it's looking at that borrowing, when it's time to renew, if something was to happen globally that impacts that, we can only sort of budget for the best of our ability at that time, if that makes sense.
Can I just follow up on it, if I may? So you're saying that the £5 million that we've got borrowed, that's a fixed rate, is it? So that's what I understood it always to be. So it's only actually if we need to borrow any more, that would have the impact. I see. Okay, fine.
Just one further point on page 219. At the top, there's a table concerned with the council's borrowing or financing, which has shot up in between 24-25 and 25-26. It's moderated a little bit in 26-27. But can you account for that rather dramatic increase in borrowing, apparently? So it's on the top, page 219. I beg your pardon. Sorry. Is that line? Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so this table looks at how the capital program is financed, and so the kind of this is a measure of how much. So you'll see the total there is the net financing need for the year. So this is where this is a measure of so the CFR is a measure of how much what is the need for the borrowing. So obviously we try to maximize sort of manage our cash flow in such a way where the borrowing is minimized. So that assessment is undertaken as a part of every year's budget setting, looking forward as a sort of trying to forecast our cash flow So although that figure to the 5.6, which is it looks a lot larger, that's just a measure of the need to borrow rather than actual borrowing.
Actual solid borrowing.
Oh,
I see. Right. Okay. Right. Sorry. Yes, indeed. Yes.
Looking through just quickly at the current capital programme, there are items in there that are expended, that are financed by borrowing, and one of those, a big ticket item, would be the shortfall in capital costs of the domestic food waste programme. We haven't actually incurred those because we haven't been able to buy the freighters yet. They're in order. But that is the estimated increases where we've got items in the capital programme that are not funded by grants or capital receipts. And that's one particular item. The Flash, the Fakenham Leisure Centre, that's mainly grant funded. But it's where we've got items of capital expenditure that have been incurred or planned for, then that would increase that borrowing, because we have to account for where we would fund it, even if we don't crystallise that borrowing externally, as Officer King has just mentioned.
Thank you. Are there any further points? Well, we're asked to recommend to full council that the Treasury Management Strategy 2026-27 be approved. Can we have a proposer for that? Thank you. Seconder? Okay. All those in favour, raise your hand. Thank you very much. Okay, the penultimate item is the GRAC update and action list. Can I ask Officer Falconbridge to elucidate that?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Chair. A few points. Hopefully, you've been getting my emails updating everybody of how we're getting on with those actions. The top one is probably the most complicated. Obviously, it's been there for a long while. Done a bit of digging on that. We dated it back to sort of December 24, so before I sort of came into position and before a lot of officers also sort of came into position. Officer McCallum kindly suggested Officer King could look at that for us. Officer King sort of came back, but I think what was required was more, I think Councillor Cushion, I think, raised it initially, was more based on property assessments linked to the local plan. Obviously, that local plan's now been obviously approved, so obviously we're a lot further down the line there. So I think as a committee, you might want to consider possibly sort of reviewing that, or at least sort of downgrading its position on the action tracker, and whether we need to keep that on there, or like I say, make it a little bit loose, because obviously the local plan's a lot further on now from when that was originally raised. It went to an officer initially who's no longer at the council, and obviously that's why it sort of got a bit muddled and a bit lost in time, really, over that period. But again, you might want the chair to sort of discuss that, or obviously when it comes back, perhaps in March, in our March committee, you might want to sort of consider that and those sort of risks that we sort of see every quarter. Other things that we've got on there, the licensing policy, which was sort of, the chair did ask for, I think, for March 26, but the assistant director said that's actually been planned to be done for June 2026 anyway. So I think as long as you're in agreement, obviously that's all in place to be seen for June. The resilience manager for the civil contingencies has given us quite a bit of updates. Obviously did a really good report for us last time out. She's given us some updates just recently, I think yesterday, I think it was, when she was doing about the fire risk, giving us a bit more detail on that and where they stood. So again, any questions perhaps you had on that, Councillor Holiday, I think that was your sort of question, but obviously happy to answer them if I can, or get the resilience manager to give you a bit more detail if needed. I think thank you to our independent member there, who's given us a lot of good suggestions that I've sort of forwarded around to the committee. on ways we could potentially sort of help with the risk register going forward. And again, I think that risk as well that's on there, the Assistant Director of Planning is sort of due to sort of look at that, and that will again come back in our next meeting in March when we look at those risks as part of the corporate risk register. And we've obviously got our GRAC sort of day that I sort of christened it, with our training with internal audit on the 24th of March, our next meeting. So that'll be in sort of the morning, and where we also then carry on. I've actually got a typo there. I've put March 2025, it's March 2026. So obviously that is also due then, the second part of the self-assessment, for assessment. So that will be done in the morning of the 24th of March, when we also do the training, followed obviously by the meeting in the afternoon. So hopefully, Chair, that kind of covers everything off for you. But any questions? Yeah.
Yes, good. That's fine. Are there any points arising from that? No. Can I just thank? We're listed here, independent person, Mr. Platten, to write in with suggestions that might help going forward with the risk register. That has indeed happened, as you'll notice from your email inboxes. And yes, I'd like to thank Mr. Platten for producing such a comprehensive document. Thank you very much indeed. Yes.
I thought it was excellent. I just want to, at the next meeting where we have the corporate risk register, I think is on the agenda, whether perhaps we can review his suggestions as part of that.
Is that something that we can add in?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're in agreement as a committee, we could sort of sneak that in, obviously, because we are seeing, quarterly we do see the corporate risk register. So I think it will make sense that we come back on those suggestions. If as long as you're happy as a committee to review those suggestions made by the independent person, we could sort of put that as part of that same agenda item.
That looks very sensible. I mean, it would be a pity for it simply to be something which we read in our inboxes.
Yeah, Officer Hems, perhaps would like to comment on that.
Say again, sorry?
I think Officer Hems might want to comment on that as well.
Officer Hems.
Thank you. Just for the benefit of this committee, you will probably recall that there was a risk management or internal audit undertaken, for which there were some outstanding actions. That has been revisited as a follow-up audit, and there are a number of recommendations within that document which have replaced the original recommendations, and so we'll be working on those. So if it's possible to have the information that's been provided, Adam, for I can look at that at the same time, because we're working on those at the same juncture to make sure that there's consistency of risk. And what I don't want to do is then have a recommendation in one and duplicate and it be duplicated. So we'll do a read across to make sure that we're consistent there.
Yes, is that possible to do that? Great. Okay, super. Are we all happy with that one? Great. Okay, now the last piece is the GRAC work programme. And again, Officer Falconbridge, if you could
yeah, absolutely, Chair. Not really any changes on the work programme. Obviously, we're quite cool. I think the corporate risk register we're sort of bringing forward a little bit earlier in the agenda at the suggestion of Councillor Holiday. But I think other than that, unless you had any suggestions that obviously you wanted to bring in, the project management framework is coming back every month. I think again, Sir Hems is sort of leading on that one. So, or not actually, it's Officer McCann. I think I'm sort of lead on that with the project management, but that comes back every sort of quarter now. So other than that, no changes. So, yeah.
Are there any comments or suggestions on that? Okay, splendid. Right, but I think there's no reason to exclude the press and the public. So if I can just thank all contributors very much, and especially for the financial reports and the audit reports, all of which are very impressive, especially given the circumstances under which they were produced and the pressure of time. Thank you very much for everybody. So at about 3:20, I hereby close the meeting.